Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along. I've given many talks in Upminster, but never here, so this is the first. And I think you are the largest audience I've ever spoken before. So thank you very much. This is one of the most popular talks that I give. I give loads of talks and lectures in and around London and all over the South East. And I think now this is the most popular for a lot of reasons. It's one of those things that whenever I was driving with my parents and grandparents through the East End along the Mile End Road, I would always ask about the Match Girl strike. And most people have heard of it, but I couldn't find out anything much more then until I began to give lectures. And so now, when I'm interested in a topic, I do it myself. Has anybody here never heard of Annie Besant or the Match Girl strike? All of you? No, that's fine. That's all right. That's good. Now, I've got all the modern technology with me today, as you can see, as long as it all works. But we're now going to go back to old technology. Anybody got a box of matches on them? It's very rare these days when I give this talk to actually find somebody with a box of matches. Anybody got a lighter on them? A few people might have a lighter. No. Now, I don't know what the rules are in this building, so I'm going to have to be careful. But this is a Bryant and May matchbox. It's not an original, but it's the best I can find. So I try and keep it in as good a condition as I can, because that is what we're talking about. Bryant and May safety matches that only strike off the box. We're not really talking about Swan Vestas today, which supposedly you can strike off your boot or your wall. But we are talking about safety matches. The talk is actually in two halves. Although the title is Annie Besant up first, we are talking firstly about matches, because they became more and more important through the 19th century. On the right there, I've put the picture up of Annie Besant. Better remain silent, better not even think if you're not prepared to act. She was a very forceful, powerful speaker for women's rights and in effect the trade unions. And on the left, a very well-known picture. It's from Manchester. I've been to Manchester, the art gallery, but I've never actually seen this picture on display. It shows some of the staff on strike outside the factory in Fairfield Road. And I'll show it to you when we get to it. So this is primarily, the first half of the talk, as I say, is about matches. Now, if this works, good. Matchmaking, to make a match, was essentially done at home originally. It was very dangerous. On the left, as you can see, I put up the caption, necrosis of phossy jaw was always a danger, which it was. If you got some of the phosphorus or sticky stuff or sulphur on your fingers and you licked your lips, it transferred from your fingers onto your lips, onto your jaw, and it rotted your jaw and could effectively kill you. There was also the extreme danger of fire, and there unfortunately were many accidents with it. With the phosphorus, homeworking for many provided vital extra and their only income, which is true. And on the other side, a small one-sentence caption. For some, it was just one step away or one step up from the workhouse. Now, my family and my grandmother lived quite close to Fairfield Road, and I once asked my grandmother, would she have ever considered working at Bryant and May? And she said no. That for her was one step too low, if you want to put it that way. How many of your antecedents came from the area of Bow? Well, then the next question is, anybody here work at Bryant and May? Okay, so here we have a family. Whether or not there is a husband, we don't know, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4 children there. The boy clearly knows he's being photographed and has got one eye on the cameraman there. It's a very well-known photograph. Matchboxes were sold in groups of 4, But when you were making them at home, they came flat packed. It was undone, and the family had to glue the box together and put the matches in. To make a gross 144 match boxes and filled with matches at home, how much would you earn? About a penny halfpenny, exactly. That's why that table is filled with match boxes, and they were larger originally. So we're starting off in the West Country, down at Plymouth, with William Bryant. He was a Plymouth Wesleyan Methodist, but he married into a Quaker family, the Carkeet family, and Bryant and May was always a Quaker company. And he was a buyer and seller. He wasn't a Del Boy character, but he would buy and sell anything that would make some money. The imports would come in off the ships at Plymouth, so he would buy and sell, or particularly sell, soap, boot blacking, which is boot polish of course, grease, candles, sugar, and of course matches. The matches came from Sweden, as they do now by and large. And he would, in effect, he was a wholesaler, and he would retail them out to various shops. But he was looking to expand the business, find new contacts. And he wanted somebody in London, did William Bryant, and he found Francis May. Francis May had a similar business around Tooley Street, around near the Thames in London, and he became the London agent for William Bryant. He retired early from the business. He didn't like the new production methods that were going on. And so he retired, and it's Bryant's family that took over and control. And it's quite clear where the power lay between them. Now, their first contract together, partnership, was in 1839. And it's quite clear. William Bryant and his family put in £7,000. Bryant could only raise, or he only had £1,000. So it's quite clear who the power has in the business. But the name on Bryant and May matches always remains. It's always Bryant and May, even though Francis May retired early. Matches were called Congreves, Lucifers and Vesuvians. So they get together from the 1830s, 1840s onwards, and they're doing quite well. But they want every single match that Carl Lundstrom in Sweden can send to them. He can export, they'll import any match he can, every single box. But everybody wants to sell matches, and they begin to complain to Carl, look, we've run out of match boxes and matches, we need more. There are fires to be lit, cigarettes, pipes, gas mantles, fires, ovens. We need more matchboxes, more matches. Well, he says, well, you're going to have to wait your turn. Everybody wants them. And they became not angry with him because they got on very well with Carl Lundstrom, but he just couldn't supply as many as they wanted. Now, the production figures are absolutely amazing. In 1850, 230,000 plus boxes of matches were imported, and they had anything up to 240 matches in them. They were much larger. By 1855, that had risen to 10 million. And by 1860, we're up to 27 million boxes of matches imported. From 230,000 in 10 years up to 10 million. And there were up to 240 matches in a box. But that number came down. This is one of the reasons why William Bryant and Francis May, I think, parted company. He didn't like what was going on. He didn't like the new machines that were coming in. So there is a market if you can get the matches. Well, Bryant and May think, well, crumbs, if Carl Lundstrom can't supply us, we'll do it ourselves. And that's exactly what they do. They find an old factory in Fairfield Road that's empty. Now, Upminster is up there, that way. Fenchurch Street, Liverpool Street Station wasn't open in the 1860s. It didn't open until the 1870s. Liverpool Street is down this way, Upminster is over there. It had been a soap and grease and candle works, but it was empty. It was a 3-acre site, quite small. And as I was saying earlier, once a year I always go to the site because the site is still there. There is a chapel. The chapel is still there, but now it's really plush, yuppie flats. It's very expensive to live there. It's actually a conservation area, believe it or not. Last time I was there, the porter on the gate let me into the sort of yard here just to have a quick look around. I couldn't go in further because it's private housing. So in 1861 they take over this site to make their own matches. And Bryant and May became one of the most famous international company in the world, just making matches. It's amazing. So this is the site, and originally it was in effect on the ground floor, just one level only. But William Bryant and his sons, they want to begin to expand. They want more machines. That creates more work, so they need more staff. So although we're not talking about utopia where you're working, it's better to work in a controlled environment because it was relatively safe to work there. Things begin to gear up from first gear to second gear to third gear, fourth gear. So things, as I say, it's not wonderful, but it's better and safer than working at home. So around 1870, because business is good, the esteemed Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, Robert Lowe, has a really good idea, really good wheeze. Let's tax matches. Yeah. The directors don't want this tax, they don't want the prices to go up. The staff there, they don't want to go up. The general public, they don't want more expensive matches, they want the price to stay the same. Even Queen Victoria is supposed to have been against a new tax. And so it's killed stone dead. For once the directors, the shareholders, they were selling shares in Bryant and May, the shareholders and the staff worked together with publicity, public support, and they kill this tax, the idea. So William Bryant and his sons, Messrs Bryant and May, they put up a brand new drinking fountain in the East End to celebrate their victory over Robert Lowe, who was part of a Liberal government. It was a good government, but it was a soppy idea. So they put up a drinking fountain, crowds gather in the East End, a band turn up, you see the Lord Mayor of London arrives to celebrate the fact that Bryant and May have got rid of a proposed tax. And here is the rather Gothic-looking drinking fountain it is. It's not there anymore. I've never seen it. It was taken away, I think, in the early 1950s. So we've got a big crowd. We've got guardsmen over here. We've got a Bryant and May banner down there. This is all great. Great for the company, great for the staff, great for us. Matches, the cost of matches will not go up. Things are working nicely. Just a few of their sort of designs. Their publicity and marketing was second to none. It really was. These are the earlier ones over here. We've still got the word over there on the left, Vesuvians. Very colourful matchboxes, as you can see. But the key box, always to remember about Bryant and May, is the Noah's Ark up there. It's thought that they chose that logo. There is a sort of Noah's Ark on here. That's not an original one. Because William Bryant lived in Plymouth, and supposedly near where he lived was a pub called the Noah's Ark. And so, being a Quaker, a biblical reference, he thought that would be a good logo, and that became the established motif and logo for Bryant and May and their matchboxes. Very colourful, as you can see. If there was something going on, like the Cricket World Cup or the Football World Cup or Wimbledon, there'd be a special matchbox made with a picture or something on it to celebrate what's going on in England or even the world. And their matches go all over the world, to America, to Europe, everywhere. Profits are good, more machines are brought in, shareholders are happy. The staff may not quite have been so happy because their wages didn't rise very much, if at all. So these are just some of the Bryant and May matchboxes. Just two little pictures. The young girl on the left, as you can see, selling boxes of matches. They were also generally sold in boxes of 4. He didn't just buy one box, he usually bought 4, just trying to earn a few pennies on the streets of London, presumably. This young boy is a well-known Bernardo's photo that I use, holding a tray full of Bryant and May matches. It's a stage photo, of course, by Bernardo's. Whether he really had no shoes, we'll probably never know. But he looks relatively happy in the photo, at least. So he's selling Bryant and May matches on the streets of London. It's supposed to be in Greenwich, this particular photo. And again, on the far left we've got bird's eye wax vestas. Those people that smoke cigars knew that a waxed match would burn much more slower to keep the cigar going. Braided cigar lights, heads cannot fall off. These are all safety matches. This is what made Bryant and May so famous. And up here we've got Captain Webb swimming the English Channel, first man across in 1875 to celebrate his skill. Now we don't have anybody here that had worked in Bryant and May, which is always a bit of a shame. But matches were, and to a certain extent are, let's just get one out, I'll get two out actually. They're made in one long splint. Now, the match comes in one long splint and it's dipped at either end in a mixture of sulphur, paraffin and phosphorus, which of course makes it extremely dangerous for fire. I think the last layer is paraffin on top of the phosphorus. It's dipped automatically. At home it would be dipped by hand, of course. And it then goes into literally an oven, a drying machine, to make sure it's dried and safe to handle. Then of course it's cut, automatically cut into two splints. So these are just a few of the boxes, the type of publicity they put out and marketing of the time. Now this is a rather angelic picture, I think from the graphic, of Bryant and May with their staff working in Fairfield Road. Now this particular illustration shows a second level. Now what happened was originally the factory was on ground floor, but because William Bryant and his sons wanted to increase production, bring in more machines that could dip more matches, dip them faster, get them into the ovens quicker, cut them quicker, Bryant and May built another floor on top. But the working conditions now begin to worsen. There's less fresh air circulating. The wages do not rise. The profits rise for the company, the share prices rise. If you're late for work, usually about 15 minutes, the gates are closed and you can lose a whole day's pay. You can also be fined for being late, and if you dropped a match that flared by mistake, you got fined for that. And Bryant and May, because they were Quakers, would send the fines, the money, out to Quaker missionaries in Africa. That was completely illegal. They shouldn't even have done that then. So the working conditions worsen, the pay doesn't rise. At one point, although this does show children working there, they look pretty young, the managers of Bryant and May said, look, we need more children, more youngsters who can get underneath the benches and pick things up that fall off, i.e. matches, I suppose. But we can't afford to pay them everything. You're going to have to contribute something. Not a lot, just one halfpenny from your wages a week. That's all, just one halfpenny. We'll pay the rest, and that'll be fine. After a while, the managers and directors of Bryant and May think, well, no, we don't need these kids anymore. It's not worked very well. We'll get rid of them. But guess what? They don't give the halfpenny back, you see. So these sort of things. So this is all rumbling on underneath the surface. Production is rising, but there's trouble underneath. And when the strike was on, what annoyed the public and the newspapers was not the strike at first, but that boys and girls and men and women were working so closely together, God knows what they were getting up to. That is what got up people's noses at first. This is the Bryant and May, well, I call it the factory. It's all there now as it is. As I say, I used to go down there once a year just to have a look. The last time I was there, the porter at the front gate let me into the courtyard area, and they've got a big plaque on the wall. It's worth a visit. It literally is now a conservation area because the factory complex is now really good, expensive flats. The chapel is still there. I've not been in the chapel. I only went just to get into the front gate. But the chapel is still there. So this is Bryant and May. So I've now given you some of the history, very briefly, of matchmaking. And I put this picture in as a marker, because I'm now going to change over towards Annie Besant. This is a wonderful painting by an artist called Eyre Crowe. That's E-Y-R-E C-R-O-W-E. I use a lot of paintings. I used to work in the National Gallery. And the Victorian photos, which are black and white, are very good, but they don't have the colour, whereas paintings, of course, the artists put the colour back. This is Manchester, the Manchester area, and this is called dinner time. And what's happened is the girls have come out from the factories, they're having a break, they're having their lunch in the sanctuary. Because in 1867, Annie Besant had been asked to marry, Annie had been asked to marry Frank Besant. And just before she did, she went up to Manchester. She stayed with an uncle who was a top solicitor barrister at the time. He was involved in a trial of, well, some IRA men, some Fenians, I suppose as they would have been called then. They were trying to break loose some policemen, some of their comrades, some of the IRA men, and one of the policemen had been killed. And now these IRA men were on trial for their lives, and Annie's uncle was a defendant for them. She sat through the trial with her uncle, she watched the case, and when it wasn't on, she would walk around the streets of Manchester, realising how terrible the working conditions were up there in Manchester at the time, around 1867. Eventually the case was lost, and at least one of the men was hung. So this is why I put this in, just to show where we are. We're roughly 1867 into the 1870s. This is the man that she married, Frank Besant. Now, ordinarily, he would have been a good catch. He may well have been distantly related, but he asked Annie to marry him. Now, it's always Annie. I've never seen it anywhere as Anne. He asked her to marry him. She was very attractive. He was quite handsome. He wanted to be a vicar, but he couldn't get that job initially. And she said yes. She went to bed, slept on it, got up in the morning and told her mother, sorry, I want to change my mind. I don't want to marry Frank. But her mother said, no, you've made your decision. We're not going to have the scandal of you refusing him. You've made your bed. You've got to lie in it. You've got to go through with a marriage. And so she agreed. So together, they moved out to Cheltenham. I think Cheltenham Ladies College, actually. And he got a good job there. And all he wanted her to be was, in effect, the vicar's wife. He didn't have a vicarage then. That's all he wanted. They had 2 children, Mabel and Digby. And in the end, he was offered the parish of Sibsey in Lincolnshire. They married in 1867, and here he is in the churchyard. That's all he wanted. Just be my wife, have tea parties, soirees, invite the local women to tea, just get on well with them. That's all I ask of you. But at this time, Annie was changing. She was very religious. She had thought about becoming a nun, but she changed her mind from doing that. Then, with the two children, Mabel got very ill, and she nursed Mabel very well, but it really did shake her faith in God. She begins to write articles for journals and newspapers about feminist issues, about trade union issues, about social reform issues. And Frank doesn't like that. And she actually gets paid. They send her cheques showing that she's successful. But because at this period she's classed as property, he takes the money. So the marriage begins to fracture, they begin to drift apart, and at some point, he probably didn't finally snap and lose control, and he probably did hit her. I don't want to say he was a wife beater or anything like that, but he probably lost control once. And as far as Annie was concerned, that was it. So she left him, she took Mabel, Digby stayed with him, and she came down to London. Now, it's a big decision for a woman in the Victorian period to do, because now she's outside of the marriage, which she volunteered to go into. She's outside of society, she has no income, she's taken her daughter, she's got to find in effect a job to support herself and Mabel. It's a very difficult and dangerous time for her in the 1870s. And the man she meets is Charles Bradlaugh. He's a very interesting character in his own right. He was president of the National Secular Society. He doesn't believe in God. It doesn't actually say it up there. He was MP for Northampton. And every time he was asked to take the oath of office, to swear allegiance to Queen Victoria, to take his seat, he wouldn't do it. So they barred him from entering the House of Commons, but he kept getting re-elected. He and Annie worked very closely together between 1875 and, as it says, in 1885. Probably a bit too close. Now, she was very attractive, and men were attracted to her. His daughter didn't like the fact that they may well have had a relationship, because she's a married woman who's let out of society. Anyway, they worked together on a book called The Fruits of Philosophy, and they were both arrested under the Obscene Publications Act by Scotland Yard in 1877 and tried under that act. Has anybody read it?
No.
Have you found anybody who's ever read it?
I've never read it. I don't know anyone that's ever read it or even seen a copy. The reason why they were arrested under the Obscene Publications Act was because it's about something you don't talk about in polite society, and that is contraception. And certainly not in the Victorian period, you see. They only got off on a technicality, otherwise they could have gone to prison for quite a while. In a way, they were both very lucky. So we're now moving on into the 1880s, around 1887. Annie, in effect, becomes a lecturer. She writes articles. She travels over the country. She's well received. She's well liked. She's very attractive, as I said. But in 1887 was one of the key riots in London. Now, I worked in the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square when the poll tax riots were on. Yeah, when the main riot in 1887 took place, they crowded into Trafalgar Square from the East End. It was a strike about unemployment. Unemployment was a new word. It only entered the dictionary around 1887. But the crowd came into Trafalgar Square and ran down Pall Mall and smashed all the shops, the shop windows, and looted many of them, particularly those serving drink. In the poll tax riots, they didn't go down Pall Mall so much, they came up St Martin's Lane. I remember going in the next morning after the riot to get to work, and the showrooms that were selling cars, all the showrooms had been smashed in. And the trouble was, for this march, only wanting work, You know, he that will not work, neither will he eat. No one's going to support a mob of rioters. No one, there's no support for that sort of thing. It's disorganised, it's unorganised, it becomes a rabble, and nobody wants to support that. So this is 1887. But in 1888, in June, as it says there, there is a meeting of the Fabians. I like the Fabians very much. It's up in Hampstead. Henry Champion is like the chairman, let's say, and Clementina Black, who I also like very much, she reads a paper, I'm not speaking, but she reads a paper to the group. It's a private house on female labour and the working conditions in and around London. And it's quite clear what happens. I don't know how many, well, I'll show you in a minute. They have their meeting, then they have a break, probably for tea, and somebody lights up. And Henry Champion said, have you heard about the trouble at Bryant and May? I've heard, I know about the fact, that the profits are up, the shareholders are happy, but the staff, the girls, I always call them girls, they are really women. We're talking about boys and girls, but there are also men and women. The wages have not gone up. We need someone to go down to Bryant and May in the East End and find out what is going on, what has happened there. And of course the one that goes down to Bryant and May is Annie Besant. Her maiden name was Woods. I always call her Annie Besant. I tend to forget her maiden name. Her mother was very clever. When Annie was a young girl, her father died when she was quite young. They were a rising middle-class family. Her father died, and now the mother has 2 children to support. They were living on the south coast, and so what her mother decides to do is move from the south coast all the way up to Eton and open a boarding house, a boy boarding house for the boys that go to Eton, on the basis A, it will provide income as boarders, and B, they will tell their friends at school and they will tell their mothers and fathers, yeah, we can recommend a good boarding house where your son can stay where Annie Besant lived, and it worked very well. She wrote, when she was writing articles, whether or not she used her real name as well, but she wrote under the pseudonyms of Ajax and Daybreak. Why would you use the name Ajax? She chose it very carefully. Have any of the ladies used Ajax?
Yes.
Because it shines bright, it clears things, and that's exactly why she chose it. Ajax cried for the light. He really did. I think it's in, is it Homer's Odyssey? He cried for the light, and that's exactly what Ajax is. It makes things brighter and better and cleaner, improves everything, and that's why she chose that name. She was a socialist, she was a trade unionist, a Fabian. I don't know if she'd have actually used the word feminist, but she was. She was a writer, she wrote articles, and later on she took up theosophy, the belief in all religions being one, and she became an Indian nationalist in India. She married Frank against her better judgment, which she did. She was well educated, she had a private education in many ways. She was an excellent speaker, just like me. And perhaps she was a bit naive and lacking in humour, whereas I make jokes. She never would. She always wanted to be treated seriously. No jokes, please. Everything is serious. And speaking at meetings, men crowded the halls. They wanted to see her because she was very attractive. She attracted all sorts of men, which I'll talk about as well. And in 1888, what happens is she's editing a little journal called The Link. It doesn't last very long. She goes down to Bryant and May, stands outside, and she tries to talk to some of the staff, and they won't speak to her. They're frightened of losing their jobs. But eventually, a few of the women speak to her, and she writes a really inflammatory article entitled White Slavery in London. And you can imagine what happened. The managers and directors of Bryant and May go ballistic. They really do. They find out who spoke to Annie Besant and they fire the girls virtually on the spot. But this is literally the straw that breaks the camel's back, because the factory just comes to a standstill. But they want to get organised, and so supposedly the staff of Bryant and May in the East End virtually run. It's actually, they must have walked quickly, I suppose. They go to her office in the East End, it was in Bouverie Street, and they say, look, we spoke to you, and now we're sacked. You've got to help us get our jobs back. And that's exactly what happens, and so begins the really symbolic strike of women, organised by women, of the staff, although there are men as well, but it's really led by women, of the Bryant and May match girls. This is the photo that I showed you right at the beginning. This is the early days of the strike. The staff look out warily at the camera. Don't know who these... The annoying thing about many of these photos, particularly the Victorian ones, I've got loads, and you can never get the names, unfortunately. The company claimed that the staff, the women, earned 12 shillings a week. Well, I don't think they did earn as much as that. A few of them might have done. Some of the supervisors or managers might have done, but I don't think they earned as much as that. I think it's nearer 6, 8 or 10 shillings a week. And the directors also claimed that, well look, they didn't all go out on strike anyway. A lot of them have gone hot picking. Well again, that may well have been true. Some of the casual staff, the day staff, they may well have said, well we can't survive on a picket line or anything like that. We will go hot picking in Kent. But the point is, that particular month, July 1888, it was cold and it actually snowed in Kent. Now this particular photo, as I say, it's a very well-known one, is up in the People's History Museum in Manchester. Now when I gave this talk at the church just off Station Road in Upminster a few years ago, somebody came up to me, must be one of the family history groups, I give loads of talks everywhere, and they gave me a photo of Jane Whale, who was born, as it says, in 1863 in Mile End Old Town, if you know the area. She said that Jane worked at Bryant and May. The trouble is she married in 1882. Now she may have had some children, but I can't actually prove that she was one of the women on strike. I've been through the archive of Bryant and May. What I need to do is go down again and have a look and just see if I can find her name. But I know she worked there, I just can't prove if she was one of the women actually on strike, you see. Lights in Darkest England. A box like this is on display in the Museum of London. If you go down to the museum tomorrow, you will see one of these boxes on display. The Salvation Army, we were talking about earlier, actually made matches just the same as Bryant and May. But they said that their wages were higher, which is probably true. And they sent the strikers a 5-shilling donation. Now it's quite small, 5 shillings, but it's symbolic. It's public support, showing that, these women may be unorganised or disorganised, but we support the idea of why you're on strike. Our work is for God and humanity. We make safety matches only. Bear one another's burdens. So the Salvation Army immediately support the strikers. This is a painting that I only came across a few weeks ago when we were down in Bournemouth, believe it or not. But as soon as I saw it, I wanted it for this talk. This is called Recognition. It was painted in the 1930s, but it looks back into the 1880s, 1900s. The woman drops the Bryant and May matchbox. She's holding one there. She's dropping it because she's seen somebody probably that she knows. She's surprised by the person approaching her as she looks out at us. And behind her is a poster from the Graphic listing the winners of, I assume, £2,000. It's possibly a warning against gambling, which this is, or to win a prize, or hard times in old age. Now you're reduced just to selling matches. We saw it literally a few weeks ago when we were down on holiday for a few weeks, beginning of August. It's amazing. So I wanted it for this talk. I got my wife to photograph it, and I got it made up into the slide. I use paintings all the time when I can. It puts back the colour. Different things are illustrated. It's by Margaret E. Wilson. We don't know the exact date it was painted, but it was donated to the Russell Coates Museum around 1941. Remember the Paul Match goals? Lights in Darkest England. Darkest England matches bring brightness to sweated workers and scotch the phosphorine. The Salvation Army are raising the standard of comfort in the East End and should be helped, at least by every real sound reformer. And again, we've got some of the boxes over here with, again, the key Bryant and May matchbox with the Noah's Ark logo on it. So at first, no one's that interested. It's just a strike amongst a bunch of women, and people begin to think, well, oh, can't the director sort this out? Just a bunch of women, just a bunch of girls, come on with it, get this sorted out, get these people back to work. Bryant and May said, yeah, it's all right, it's just a few agitators, just a few troublemakers, we'll sort it out. But it wasn't as simple as that. It really wasn't for them. And this is the strike committee, and there's only one man in this picture, and I don't even have all the names. This particular photo is in this book, Striking a Light by Louise Raw. They hired a hall just off the Mile End Road at Charrington's Hall. Charrington, the beer maker. Charrington, of course, very famous family. This is Herbert Burrows. Herbert Burrows was a trade union organiser. He'd been up in the Lancashire Mills, organising the women, organising the trade unions there. The trade unions had only really got going in the 1880s. When I first began to give talks over 20 years ago, I started off talking about the 1890s, when there were some really long, bitter strikes in the railways and the coal mining, and I got really fed up with that. So I then moved back to the 1880s, which I think is, in many ways, more interesting. He came into London. This is Annie Besant in the centre. They hired the hall, and you could go there in the morning, meet your friends, meet people you work with, have a cup of tea, try and get warm, read a newspaper before you went out on a demonstration or a march to whip up support. We've got Margaret and Mary. Margaret known as Mog, Margaret and Mary Driscoll, the Driscoll sisters up there. We've got Kate Slater here, Ellen Johnson, and Mrs. Knowles. I don't even have her Christian name. The women over here, I've got the faces, but I don't have the names. It's really annoying. Now this is a strike literally organised and led by women. This is different. It's not going to degenerate into a drunken rabble or a drunken mob. The strike committee, if anyone's name is up here, consisted of, now there were a few others, but the main ones are Sarah Chapman, Mrs. Mary Cummins, Mary and Margaret Mog Driscoll, Alice Francis, Ellen Johnson, Eliza Martin, Mrs. Knowles, Kate Slater, Jane Wakeling, and Herbert Burrows. As I've just said, Clementina Black read a paper at Champions Fabian meeting on female labour, and Clementina Black worked as a sort of go-between in the end, between the strikers and the London Trades Council, a sort of ACAS. She worked between them as a mediator. Also present at the meeting was a Burrows, the Reverend Stuart Headlam, who I like very much. There is a school named after Stuart Headlam. I'm giving a talk on Oscar Wilde in a few weeks' time. And Stuart Headlam actually put up bail of £5,000 for Oscar Wilde when he was on trial in 1895. Reverend Stuart Headlam, George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw was a Fabian. It was he that introduced Annie to the Fabians. Graham Waller and Sidney Webb. And funny enough, I do give talks on Beatrice and Sidney Webb. Change came slowly for women in the last quarter of the 19th century. 1878, London University accepts women, other universities don't. And of course, even when you're accepted, you didn't always get the degree if you were a woman, even if you passed the course. 1882, the Married Woman's Property Act, which said that if women earned money, it came to the man. Well, we were talking about suffragettes earlier. It was Richard Pankhurst, the husband of Emmeline Pankhurst, who drafted that act. 1885, which I'm going to talk about in a second, the age of consent was raised. It was helped by William Stead. And June 1888 was the match girl strike, and women were finally allowed on local councils. They didn't have the vote, but they could go on to local councillors, and Annie was elected to be on the London School Board. So these changes come very slowly in the last quarter. But these are to them. George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish writer, and Thomas Stead, who I like, as I say, very much. Now, Annie was attracted to both of these men. They weren't attracted to her. Do I have to explain why? Now, George Bernard Shaw is so well known, but Thomas Stead isn't. He has a bust statue on the embankment. He was an editor. He was a Liberal supporter of Gladstone. He was up in Darlington. Then he got offered the editorship of the Pall Mall Gazette. Now, Pall Mall is only a small area around Westminster, St James's, but it was very influential, was the Pall Mall Gazette. And he was involved in trying to stop child trafficking for sex. Now, it's not the sort of subject that's talked about even today very much, but a lot more than it was then. So what he did, he went out and he bought a young girl, I think she was under 13, but around 13, for £5 from her mother in London, and he had sex with her. And he wrote an article about it. Now, the age of consent was 13, but she was underage, so he went to prison for about 3 months. But he publicised child trafficking for sex. George Bernard Shaw just said and thought that Thomas Stead's brain had gone maggoty. Now, the fact is that although he did buy the girl from her mother, after he'd bought her, he allowed the girl to return to her mother, and he just wrote that he had sex with her. He didn't, but he still went to prison for the crime. What he was trying to do was publicise it, and in 1885, the Act was changed to what it is today, where the age of consent was raised, and still is, at 16. So he was not the sort of paedophile then or now that people tend to think. But they were Annie Besant was attracted to both of them. And the point is, when at Charrington Hall, when the staff were there in the morning, before they went out and let out a march, George Bernard Shaw was one of the cashiers. He would pay you the strike pay. The married women got around 5 shillings a week. The single men or women got around, I think, 3 shillings a week. Now, 5 shillings a week in 1888 is not going to go very far. And the strike pay would not have lasted long had it been a really long, bitter strike. But he was involved in the strike right the way through. This is just one of the pictures of the move. As you can see, a humble petition. So, as this is rumbling on, the House of Commons now takes interest, and they they form a commission of inquiry, and they ask these strikers to come to the House of Commons and explain what the hell's going on down there. Why can't you get back to work? So the staff, Annie Besant, I'm sure, was among them, but the strike organisers that I've just shown you, they went to the House of Commons, they put their case to the MPs, and the MPs agreed with them. So now they've got MPs agreeing with them, and you can imagine what's going on with Bryant and May. On the surface, they're very calm, very organised, we've got it all under control. But when you look at the archive, they were absolutely petrified of being beaten by a bunch of women, literally. Because that's exactly what happened. And in the end, after about a month, in July, the director said, well, okay, come back to work, we'll review the wages, we'll improve the working conditions, we'll even bring in a dentist to make sure your teeth are okay, we'll look at the wages, come back, no recriminations, everybody gets their job back. Oh, you haven't won, we're just being amenable to you. But that's exactly what happened. And so the staff go back. But this is the first instance. This is why this strike is important to me and everybody else. It's symbolic. It's not the most important strike in terms of what happened in the 1890s, but it's the first successful strike organised by women, led by women. They're not part of a union initially. Irish extraction, many of them could hardly read or write, but they win because they've got a just cause, and Bryant and May give in. Coming towards the end almost, these are just two little pictures. This newspaper clipping, it doesn't blow up very well, but it talks about the fact that some of the women have got infected with phosphorus. Eventually, around 1900, 1910, they found a safe phosphorus that didn't infect you. And so matchmaking becomes much safer for everybody. But in 1891, it was still very dangerous. The directors claimed, look, there is no phossy jaw anymore in Bryant and May. We've stopped all that, and we've got a dentist. If someone's got a pain in their jaw, our dentist will see them. Well, it's true, there was no phossy jaw in Bryant and May, because if you showed signs of it, you got the boot. You weren't allowed to work there. Very simple. This is obviously a put-up picture. I had some good debates with various groups, including some in Upminster about this photo. I think what's happened, this is just after the strike. These machines, which I think are cutting the splints, have been dragged out into the courtyard outside, lined up. The boys and girls have been told to clean themselves up, look smart, get on with your work, stand there for the photographer. And I think that's what's going on here. And again, this must be some sort of dipping machine. This is always a problem with this talk, knowing exactly what's going on in the pictures. I didn't work in Bryant and May, and I've met only very few people at talks that did work there. We've obviously got supervisors here in bowler hats with the young boys, but I think it's some sort of dipping machine. Could be paraffin, but I'm just guessing a little bit here. But they're obviously, this is in a way a much more natural picture of the period of Bryant and May. Bryant and May on the left here. Bryant and May's patent safety matches are harmless to those employed in their manufacture and afford protection from fire. And by 1910, 1920, that poster is undated, unfortunately. That's probably absolutely true. And it says there on the box, patent safety match is not poisonous, with the Noah's Ark symbol clearly in the middle. If you want to have a bit of fun, all you've got to try and do is either count the matchboxes or count the staff. When I've got a few spare minutes, I have a go counting this line, then I begin to get fed up and give up. But it must have been quite a few hundred. It was at least 600. I don't know if there were 1,000. And the archive, I can only account for a few hundred that were getting strike pay. Some of the others, as I said, may well have gone hot picking or found other casual work. We've got Mary Driscoll here, seated, and Margaret Mogg behind her. I don't know the actual date of this photo. It's in Louise Roy's book, Hand on the Shoulder. And they're clearly hot-picking. The date is unknown. But the men, as you can see, have got uniforms on. It must be a World War I photo. They've obviously gone hot-picking. They obviously left Bryant and May at some point. And Mary then took two shops in Parnham Street, which is nearby. One sold cat's meat, and the other one was a corn chandler. Now, it's interesting selling cat's meat, because one of my antecedents did sell cat's meat, and she was very successful. You could make good money just selling cat's meat. I assume it was horse meat, but even so, you could make money doing that. I always ask the question, aside from the match girl strike, what was the most important event of the 1880s?
Melbourne was Property Act of 1884. Melbourne was Property Act of 1884.
That's an interesting answer. One of the best answers. That's a different answer. Well, From your point of view, that's fine. That helps 50% or roughly of England. That's a good answer. Most people tend to say Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was just after. I talk about Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was just after the strike. But in 1889, there was the dock strike for the dockers' tanner. Not a penny off the pay, not an hour on the day. And the point is, when the docks came to a standstill, people just before that had looked back and say, where's the next trouble in the East End going to come along? We've had this match goal strike. Where's the next big thing? And it was the dock strike. And they looked back to the success of the women to get organised. And that's exactly the point here. Annie herself, soon after, she more or less helped form a matchmakers' union. But she would, I don't know if she became discouraged, disillusioned with it, but she left the country, she went to India, and she became part of the Indian National Congress. And eventually she became its president. She was literally working with and over Gandhi. And here they've come back for a conference, they're in Trafalgar Square, you can see, you've got the lion over there, it's pouring rain as usual, probably high summer, and she's making a speech, much older woman. And that's what interested her, theosophy, and she became virtually an Indian, to put it crudely. So the millions and millions and millions of matches that are made now, just a modern sort of photo. And again, now, when I gave this talk at Ilford, I run Ilford Historical Society, somebody came up to me and gave me the stamp, which I've had made up into a slide. Now she, in a way, is more famous in India than she is here, because she's part of the Indian National Congress. The blue plaque is at Bryant and May. The match goal strike of 1888 was led here by Annie Besant, journalist and lecturer, 1847 to 33. Following the strike, Annie Besant became secretary of the new Matchmakers Union. In 1917, she became president in just 1917 of the Indian National Congress, and was also international president of the Theosophical Society. Now, what's interesting from the stamp point of view, she was born in 1847, but on the stamp it says 1837. Actually got that wrong. This must have been withdrawn. When I saw this, first of all, I thought it was 15 rupee, but it's, that would be worth a fortune. It's probably 15 annas. I think that may well be the last one. If it is, I'll go back. Oh, this is the last one. This is the book that one of the key books that I've used. I've got other books that mention this particular strike. I've only bought one with me today by Louise. Well, just to finish off, this is a very symbolic strike. It's not massive like the dock strike, which thousands of men were involved. The 1890 strikes where there were steel workers, coal miners, railway men on the strike for months on end. This strike lasted just about a month. Many of the women may well have gone hop picking, as I said, but symbolically, it's very important. The first really successful non-unionised strike, organised and led by women, that was successful. Symbolically, I think that's why it's important. That's why I like it very much. I like Annie Besant very much. She did get involved with men, but it was hardly her fault to be attractive. And for her to be attracted to the wrong sort of man that weren't interested. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much for coming. That will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jef.